They called him mad, dangerous, a man who wanted to burn Western morality to the ground. It's no coincidence Nietzsche compared himself to dynamite. What he wrote was never meant to make you comfortable, but to blow up everything you once mistook for truth. For centuries, we've been taught to be obedient, to have faith. Faith in God, in absolute morality, in the rules of life laid down by society. But Nietzsche walks in and coldly asks, what if all of that is just a story told to keep you tame? What if the good person is simply a domesticated version of someone who was once fiercely powerful? This video is not a happiness formula, and it's not a moral sermon. It is an invitation for you to step into the darkest laboratory of all, your own mind. There, Nietzsche will one by one break the spine of herd morality, strip the mask off nihilism, and ask you a brutally direct question. If no one told you what you live for, how would you write that answer for yourself? And here is where you have to decide. Turn the video off and go back to a safe life, or keep going. Because in a few minutes, we'll touch on ideas that religion doesn't want to mention, school never teaches, and society only dares to quote half of, so they become harmless. Once you've heard them in full, you will never look at morality, belief, or your own life the same way again. Welcome to Nietzsche's Forbidden Philosophy. Forbidden Idea 1. Beyond Good and Evil. If you look at history like a tape on fast forward, you'll see that morality never stands still. There was a time when slavery was not only accepted, but considered part of the natural order. People could buy and sell other human beings as property and still be respected, still be seen as respectable. There was a time when women were forbidden to study, to vote, to own property, treated as mere instruments for reproduction, and all of that was justified with moral arguments. Against nature, against God's will. Things we now take for granted, individual freedom, equality of rights, freedom of thought, were once branded heresy, immorality, rebellion. If good and evil were truly a permanent order handed down by the universe, why do they change color from century to century, culture to culture? Nietzsche looks at this and says, maybe the problem isn't in the things themselves, but in the labels. Good and evil are not objective properties of the world, but names each community chooses for what it likes or fears. In an age terrified of war, peace is raised to the highest moral pedestal. In an age terrified of losing control, traits like obedience and submissiveness are made sacred. A ruling class calls anything that threatens its interests bad, and anything that reinforces its position good. Morality through Nietzsche's eyes is like a beautiful mask hiding fear, selfishness, and the herd's desire to protect sameness. When you hear someone say, "This is wrong," try asking, "Wrong according to which frame of reference?" Nietzsche doesn't completely deny morality. He tears off its fake sacredness. Instead of seeing morality as a command from the cosmos, he sees it as a human construction. Humans can create it, and they can change it. Compared to many other philosophers, Nietzsche doesn't go looking for a new moral law to replace the old one. Kant tried to rebuild something absolute. Act only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Mill talked about the greatest good for the greatest number. Religion invokes the will of God. Nietzsche's stance is different. No, I won't put a new good/evil chart on the table. I want you to ask yourself, why do you need those two labels so badly in the first place? Here, beyond good and evil, does not mean do whatever you want, forget morality. What Nietzsche wants to attack is not the capacity for moral judgment, but moral laziness. The habit of grabbing a ready-made rule book written by someone else and slapping it onto every situation. In Nietzsche's world, the moral question becomes, does this action fit the kind of person I want to become? When you decide to lie, the issue is not, which commandment am I breaking, but what am I carving into my own being right now? Every choice is a knife stroke into your character. Good or evil are no longer labels imposed from outside, but the degree of honesty between your actions and your deepest nature. That is the starting point of Nietzsche's free spirit. The free spirit is the one who dares to do the hardest work, building their own moral compass based on a deep understanding of themselves and of life, and then living in line with it even when no one approves. He doesn't blindly trust ready-made morality, but he doesn't shrug off moral questions either. He understands. Precisely because there is no absolute good and evil, the responsibility of choosing who he will be becomes heavier. And you, what kind of society are you living in? If you had to throw away all the right/wrong rules others taught you and keep only one principle that is truly yours, what would that principle be? Share it with us in the comments. That is the first step toward a liberated consciousness. Why is beyond good and evil seen as poison? Because if you accept that every moral system is a human product, it means any institution can be put on the operating table. Nothing remains untouchable, absolutely sacred. Everything can be questioned. Whom does this law serve? Whom does it keep safe? Whom does it bind? On top of that, someone who dares to live beyond good and evil in Nietzsche's sense is almost impossible to manipulate with moral fear. You can't scare them with, if you do that, people will judge you, because their yardstick is not the crowd's praise. You also can't tempt them with, be a hero for the group, if the price is betraying themselves. They're willing to be seen as bad in the eyes of a community in order to keep a deeper, long-term inner integrity. Beyond good and evil is not an invitation into chaos. It's an invitation into moral adulthood. You no longer have the right to be naive. You no longer have the right to say, I was just following the rules. You must know what you are doing to your own soul. For Nietzsche, that is what real morality is. He doesn't stop there, though. Nietzsche keeps going deeper to the final pillar holding up the whole edifice of Western morality, the story of God. A forbidden idea too, God is dead. Before Nietzsche appeared, the Western world lived inside a very simple story. Up above there is a God, and from him flows all meaning. Right and wrong are not up for debate, they are given. Good and evil are not things to be discovered by yourself. They are taught. Morality is like a pre-written code, signed by an absolute being. In that story, Christian morality is the center. Be humble, be obedient, sacrifice, and endure now to be rewarded in the afterlife. Suffering? There is a reason. Injustice? God is testing you. Everything is part of the plan of a higher will. A person may be poor, may fail, may be trampled, but they can still hold on to one thing, the faith that someone up there is watching them, recording, judging, balancing the scales. It is a universe with order. You may not understand, but above does. And that thought alone is enough for many people to endure their lives. In that context, Nietzsche's phrase, "God is dead," lands like a punch to the chest. But the important thing is this: Nietzsche is not standing on a podium, gloating, shouting, "I killed God." He is not a cheap atheist. He's more like a spiritual coroner, looking at the corpse of a belief system that has been cold for a long time and saying, "Don't you see that it's dead?" In The Gay Science, he tells the story of a madman who runs into the marketplace at noon, holding a lantern and shouting, "We killed God." The crowd laughs at him, but that madman is just a metaphorical image of Nietzsche himself, the only one willing to say what the entire age is trying to avoid. Because something has been quietly changing. Science, critical thinking, rationalism, and psychology have all been gnawing away at the old religious foundation. People now trust the white coat of the doctor, trust data, physics, more than miracles. But here's the paradox. The old morality, the old meanings, the old habits are kept intact as if nothing happened. God no longer holds the foundational role in the modern mind, yet we continue to use a morality, a value system, a way of life built on that collapsed foundation. You can see this right now in modern life. Many young people say, "I don't believe in religion, I only believe in science." Yet at the same time, they live with a vague sense that somewhere out there must be justice. If I live well, the universe will compensate me. They reject God with their words, but secretly deposit their hopes, fears, and guilt into some abstract, higher power. The biggest issue is not whether God exists or not, but this question: if God is no longer the guarantor of meaning, morality, and purpose, what are they based on now? If there is no one up there writing the script of your life in advance, what will you write into that empty space? This is where nihilism rises. When the old system is no longer convincing, but you're not yet strong enough to create a new one, you fall into a gray zone. Nothing really matters. You can hear it in phrases like, "Just live for fun. We all die anyway." Nietzsche saw this coming. He didn't promote nihilism, he predicted it. A civilization that has killed God but tries to live as if nothing happened will inevitably produce hollow, discarded people, or those sucked into new, secular religions. They replace God with the market, the state, the will of the people, the universe's plan. But the psychological pattern remains the same: the need for something outside themselves to hold their fear. This is the deeper reason why the idea God is dead is suppressed or reduced to a shallow atheist slogan. Because if you follow it to the end, you'll have to face a hard truth. Many people still go to church, still talk about morals, still do charity, but deep inside, their faith is empty. Admitting God is dead is not just a philosophical statement. It is an act of spiritual maturity. It means cutting away the last crutch of borrowed meaning. But at the same time, Nietzsche knows, only when the old foundations fall do humans for the first time have the chance to lay a foundation of their own. Forbidden Idea 3. Morality as the weapon of the weak. If the sacred foundation has already cracked, what about morality? All those rules about living well, being a good person that we're taught from childhood, where do they actually come from? From some eternal truth, or from very specific people with very specific interests? Before it was dissected, morality was treated as a no-go zone. People spoke of a universal moral law, of duty, of commandments, as if everything had been carved in stone by a transcendental hand. Nietzsche walked in and threw a very simple yet brutal grenade. Who benefits from these laws? This is the question almost no one teaches you to ask. Who wrote the moral code? Whom was it designed to protect, and whom was it designed to restrain? Why is ambition branded as bad, while submission is praised as noble? Nietzsche sums up the answer in the line, "There are no moral phenomena at all, only a moral interpretation of phenomena." From there, he opens up a shocking distinction: master morality and slave morality. For the masters, strong, creative, confident people who do not bow to the crowd, good means courageous, full of vitality, inventive, and honest with one's own instincts. Bad means weak, cowardly, petty. You can see traces of this in warrior cultures, in artists who dare to break the mold, and in those who create new value without asking permission. But not everyone has that kind of life force. Another class of people cannot win in the game of strength, so they change the rules. They cannot become strong, so they start telling a new story in which the strong become evil and the weak become good. That is slave morality. In this story, fear is renamed humility, submission is called piety, powerlessness is wrapped in the phrase accepting one's fate. Unable to defeat the lion, the flock of sheep declares, "The lion is wicked, the sheep are good." And the frightening thing is that over time, this story becomes the official morality. In school, the good child is the one who sits still, follows the rules, and doesn't make trouble. In the family, the dutiful child is the one who shelves their own dreams to live out the script their parents wrote. Do you think all that is just random culture? Or is it a reward system very carefully designed to favor obedience and punish raw vitality? Nietzsche names the psychological mechanism behind it: resentment. The weak, unable to confront the strong in real life, take revenge in imagination, in language, in morality. They don't dare say, "I want to be like you," so they say, "I am better than you because I am kinder." They don't dare seize power, so they say, "I am nobler because I do not compete." When that story is repeated long enough by religion, school, family, and media, it turns into air. No one remembers when it was invented, by whom, or for whose benefit. It's just the way things are. And from there, morality becomes an extremely subtle tool of control. That is the point where morality no longer lifts people. It makes them smaller, bowed. It turns lions into house cats, locking themselves in a cage of guilt. For Nietzsche, that is the tragedy. Morality should have been the expression of strength, of life force, of healthy self-respect. But under the hand of collective resentment, it is twisted into a bridle looped around each individual's neck, forcing them to take small steps, in line, never roaring. You're beginning to see why the idea that morality is the weapon of the weak is considered dangerous. Because the moment a young person starts asking, "Are the values I believe in really mine, or do they belong to the ones above me?" the entire system of education, religion, morality starts to tremble, and the tools of control based on guilt and shame begin to fail. A society full of people who define their own values is very hard to manage. You can't scare them with, "What will people think? Heaven will punish you. Living like that is immoral." They will ask back, "Who gets to decide what I am?" That is the real forbidden point in Nietzsche. He is not calling for humans to become evil. He wants you to remove the invisible chain around your neck. Once you see that chain as a chain and not as a holy wreath, The game will never be the same again. If you're still listening at this point, it means there is a part of you that refuses to wear that chain forever. Thank you for walking with me almost halfway through this journey. If you want to keep going as we unfasten more layers of chain around your will, around your very life, leave a small sign, a like, a subscription, so we know you're still here, and so I know I'm not talking to myself. Now, let's go on and open the doors that lie behind. Forbidden Idea 4, Will to Power. If morality as the weapon of the weak shows you how society binds you from the outside, then will to power shows you the energy screaming from within. The phrase, will to power, has been mercilessly smeared throughout history. Many people hear the word power and immediately think of war, fascism, oppression, and crushing others. The 20th century used Nietzsche's name as lipstick on the face of collective violence, then shoved him into a corner as a dangerous, cruel philosopher. But the will to power that Nietzsche speaks of is not a license to coerce and dominate other people. He writes in The Antichrist, "What is good? All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man." In Nietzsche, the will to power is first and foremost power over oneself. It is the deepest drive of life, refusing to merely exist and wanting instead to rise, to expand, to affirm oneself uniquely. Imagine a seed lying under a heavy slab of concrete. Over time, from a tiny crack, it still sprouts, breaks through the concrete, and reaches for the light. That sensation, the invisible force that compels all life to spread, to test its limits, to go one step further, that is the will to power. A child learning to speak, stumbling over syllables and repeating them hundreds of times until the word is clear. An artist drawing, then tearing, writing, then deleting, searching for an image or a line that is truly their own. You, after a collapse, suddenly decide to train, to study, to start again. None of that is just wanting to live. It is wanting to live on a higher level. Biologists speak of the instinct to survive, to reproduce. Nietzsche peers one layer deeper. Survival is only the minimum. Life itself is not satisfied with not yet dead. It wants an upgrade. It wants to feel stronger than yesterday. A person who only wants not to starve lives one way. A person who wants to become a stronger version of themselves lives another way. The gap between the two is where the will to power operates. And it is not something alien. Every wave of dissatisfaction you feel toward yourself, why am I so passive? Why does my life feel so meaningless? Is a sign that the will to power is knocking. Every time you envy someone, not just because they have more than you, but because they dare to do what you don't, that too is the will to power. It is the itch inside pushing you to crack the old shell. When it is crushed by guilt-based morality, by fear of being judged, the will to power mutates into self-destruction, addiction, violence, and envy. Those who forbid themselves from expressing their strength through creation and building will seek power through shortcuts. They get addicted to gambling, games, and social media, so that in those virtual worlds they can be top one, the winner, even while remaining powerless in real life. They gossip, drag others down, because pulling someone lower is the only way they know to feel higher. See it? A will to power that cannot live straight will break out sideways. In the language of modern psychology, you could call this compensation, the reaction of a repressed ego. Nietzsche, long before the diagnoses, saw through the labels and called it by its true name, a distorted will to power. But if recognized and transformed, the will to power is precisely what builds every great work, and also what shapes ordinary lives that are not cowardly. When you use that first flash of envy not to degrade someone, but to ask, what is it in them that I long for? And then quietly train, study, and build that capacity in yourself, that is the will to power raised to a creative level. When you use your dissatisfaction with yourself as fuel to change habits, to build discipline, not to prove anything to anyone, but so you can look in the mirror and no longer despise yourself, that is the will to power working in the right place. Nietzsche does not urge you to become a tyrant. He wants you to become the sovereign of your own life. Such people are not afraid of being alone. They accept the cold that comes with not having the herd pat them on the back. They are not easily bought by cheap rewards, a bit more money, a bit more status, a bit more medals. They don't measure their value by those things. Their measure is, am I more than the me of yesterday? To any conservative system, this kind of person is a threat. They carry within them a kind of independence no curriculum can control. Nietzsche warns us with the line, the higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. No system can keep them tied forever with slave morality because they have already touched a deeper instinct, the instinct to rise, not to be above others, but to avoid betraying themselves. Nietzsche asks you an intensely personal question. The force in you that wants to rise, what are you using it for? To build or to destroy? Once you see it, you can stop being ashamed of your ambition, your envy, your dissatisfaction. Instead, you learn to bend it in the direction you choose. From there, every step forward, no matter how small, becomes an expression of your will to power. Forbidden Idea 5. AMOR FATI. Try looking back at one specific wound in your life. A betrayal, a loss, a humiliating failure, a childhood that was not loved in the right way. If you live by ordinary inertia, you'll get stuck in the question, why me? Why did they treat me like that? Why is life so unfair to me? Each time you recall it, it's as if you're shot with a new arrow. The original wound is one, but you fire hundreds more into yourself by chewing it over, comparing, cursing, playing the victim. Nietzsche stares straight at that and offers a brutal line. What does not kill me makes me stronger. The more intensely life burns, the more it collides with reality, the higher the price it must pay. The question is, what do you use suffering as? A reason to collapse or raw material to grow? Amor fati, Latin for love of fate, is Nietzsche's answer. He doesn't teach you resignation, because resignation is a form of paralysis. Amor fati is the opposite, not just enduring, but loving what has happened. I do not wish the past had been different. I do not want to erase a single scratch. If you remove one shard of pain from your life, you also remove a portion of the strength it left behind. Painful events are no longer accidents crashing in from outside, but part of the structure of an ego that is still growing. You no longer say, that destroyed me. You say, that made me who I am. Resentment fades, replaced by ownership. That happened to me. It's not pleasant, but it's part of me. Nietzsche wants you to try a different type of inner dialogue. Not why me, but what now? It has happened. No God, no universe is going to rewind the tape for you. So how do you intend to use it? Bury it like a corpse, or forge it like metal? The psychology of someone who lives with amor fati is not numbness. They still feel pain, and their emotions may even be sharper than other people's. The difference is that they no longer add an extra layer of resistance, blame, and self-pity on top of that pain. They let the wound do its work, forcing them to examine how they live, forcing them to grow, forcing them to change. For Nietzsche, greatness is the ability to say yes to your life as a whole, not only to the bright chapters, but also to the dark ones, the shameful pages. They don't need to dream of some ideal version of myself who never made mistakes. They know that without their old mistakes, they would not have their present clarity. When they are fired, those who have learned to love their fate still go through shock and hurt, but then they use that fall as a turning point to audit their life. They take advantage of the free time to learn a new skill, to look for work more suited to their true nature and strengths. When they are betrayed, they do not stop at the pain. They listen more closely to their intuition, learn to set boundaries, recognize the red flags they once chose to ignore. When they go through loss, they don't only collapse, but also learn to cherish the time they had, to honor the fragility of life, and from there, to live more deeply and mindfully with what remains. All those situations, instead of turning them into bitter people, become inner strength training for the soul. If you pay attention, AMOR FATI is related to many other traditions. Stoics like Marcus Aurelius spoke of consenting to the order of the cosmos. Buddhism speaks of accepting impermanence, of non-attachment. But Nietzsche goes one step further. He doesn't just tell you to accept, he tells you to love. To love so much that you can no longer stand watching yourself choke your own growth with the past. Once you've accepted that even the worst things that happened are things you will still say yes to, the threat you will suffer loses most of its power. You are no longer easily bought with the dream that one day everything will be rewarded if you just obey. In the end, AMOR FATI is not a philosophy to hang on your wall. It is a profoundly personal question. What event in your life do you still secretly wish had never happened? And what would change if, instead of trying to erase it from your story, you embraced it, showed compassion toward those chapters, and used them to grow? That is the moment you stop negotiating with fate. Stop demanding that the universe reshuffle the deck. You take the exact hand you've been dealt, look straight at every good and bad card, and say the sentence Nietzsche most wanted to hear: I choose to play this hand to the very end. Forbidden Idea 6, ÜBERMENSCH. So, if we live long enough with this love of fate, what do we become? Nietzsche has a name, at once beautiful and slandered, for that answer: ÜBERMENSCH, often translated as Superman. First, we need to understand that ÜBERMENSCH is not meant in any extremist sense, because Nietzsche died before he could defend his idea. His sister, Elizabeth, who was close to the radical German nationalist movement, edited, selected, and spliced his notes in a way that later aligned with National Socialism. Then the Nazi propaganda machine grabbed the word Übermensch, stripped away its context, and turned it into a slogan for a superior race: pure blood. Thus, in just a few decades, a spiritual concept was twisted into a racist catchphrase. To give Übermensch back to Nietzsche, we must state clearly: Übermensch has nothing to do with nationality, skin color, or bloodline. It has nothing to do with race, great nations, or superior peoples. The Übermensch belongs to psychology and spirit. It is an image, a metaphor for a new kind of human being, someone who dares to create their own values and their own life, instead of living as a copy of any ready-made standard. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche has Zarathustra say, "Man is something that shall be overcome." Why overcome? Because after God is dead, after God is no longer the center of meaning, a huge void appears. If we are not careful, that void will be filled with nihilism, with boredom, with merely getting through the days. Nietzsche presents the image of the ÜBERMENSCH, not a savior, but a type of person, a direction for spiritual evolution. This person does not wait for meaning from outside. They create value themselves. They do not treat their life as a draft. They turn their life into a work of art. They accept the emptiness of the sky, and from there they live like artists, creating meaning through the way they live. A father of the ÜBERMENSCH type does not try to become the perfect dad according to parenting manuals, but a man brave enough to teach his child how to look at life, honest enough to say, "I'm also learning how to be a human, just like you." A worker of the ÜBERMENSCH type doesn't just ask, "How much does it pay?" but also, "What kind of person is this job turning me into?" This kind of freedom comes at a high price: loneliness, misunderstanding, resistance. The ÜBERMENSCH does not get applause from the crowd. To live this way, you must dare to disappoint even those closest to you. Dare to walk against the most reasonable expectations. You might choose a career path that feels bizarre to your family. You might leave a marriage that looks beautiful from the outside, but is dead inside you. You might walk away from a circle of friends you've had for years, but who only keep you in your comfort zone. You will hear every kind of line. "Why can't you just live normally? You're being selfish." The ÜBERMENSCH accepts that cold, the cold of no longer being held by the herd. They pay for misunderstandings to purchase honesty with themselves. So why has this figure been so badly distorted and smeared? Simply because a person who doesn't need a shepherd is always a threat to any system that depends on a flock. The church needs believers to feel weak and in need of guidance. A totalitarian state needs citizens to believe that without it, there will only be chaos. Extremist movements need followers to believe that only the leader knows the way. In every such case, the ÜBERMENSCH is a rebellious image, a human standing upright, refusing to hand over their soul to any collective. Nietzsche doesn't need you to believe there is some Superman out there already. He needs you to sit down seriously and ask, am I living as a cheap copy of someone else? Or have I begun, however slightly, to live as someone who is moving toward a higher version of myself? ÜBERMENSCH is not a destination, but a direction. The direction of self-overcoming, self-creation, and self-responsibility. Forbidden Idea 7, Eternal Recurrence. After sketching the outline of the ÜBERMENSCH, Nietzsche still has one last stab reserved for us. A final test that isn't graded by marks, but by the deepest feeling in your heart. He calls it the idea of eternal recurrence. And its core question is brutally simple. If you had to live this exact life again, in every detail, infinitely many times, could you bear it? Nietzsche doesn't present this idea as a religious doctrine or a physical model of the universe. He constructs it as a psychological experiment. Imagine, one night when you are exhausted, worn out, most fed up with life, a demon comes near and whispers, "Everything you are living, have lived, will repeat." Exactly. Every smallest joy, every greatest humiliation, every loss, every time you were despised, every act of courage. Nothing added, nothing taken away. Then it asks, how will you react? That first reaction already tells a great deal about the true quality of your life. What is the function of this idea? It strips from your hands the most indulged illusion. Whatever, I'll fix it next time. I'll deal with it tomorrow. I'll try harder later. Eternal recurrence cuts off every path that leads to later. If today, with all your choices, habits, the way you love, the way you work, the way you treat yourself, will circle back infinitely, then each decision suddenly carries eternal weight. Another evening you choose to scroll on your phone until 2 a.m. is not just one slip-up. In Nietzsche's experiment, you've just chosen a behavioral pattern that will be carved into eternity. A relationship you let rot in silence and pretense is no longer, we can talk it out someday. It becomes the endlessly repeated pattern of your entire mode of existence. Suddenly, a life of habit, of getting through the days, of just making it to the weekend, appears as a voluntary punishment. You are the one signing the sentence, live this exact way forever. But Nietzsche does not offer eternal recurrence to scare you with the universe. He doesn't demand you believe that time literally repeats, that the cosmos is some mathematical loop. He uses it as a tool of self-questioning, as a mirror turned up to maximum intensity. The question he throws into your heart is short. If you had to relive this very day forever, would you accept it? Just this one, today. If your most secret answer is no, that is a wake-up call about the life you are living. Here, Nietzsche goes against many of today's cultural consolations. People tell us, it's okay to make mistakes, there's always a second chance. Technically, that might be true, but it easily becomes an excuse to let yourself postpone forever. Eternal recurrence removes that second chance life raft from your imagination. It forces you to face a hard truth. Every moment is unique, and how you use it says who you are far more honestly than any self-justifying story. Why do so few dare to talk to us about this idea? Because it strips bare an uncomfortable truth. Most of us are living as if time were something we can waste freely. We argue over the same trivial things again and again, stay in jobs we hate for years, prolong habits we despise in others yet tolerate in ourselves. As if once we've burned through this day, the universe will kindly reset the game for us with a fresh new level tomorrow. If a young generation began to live as if each day would return infinitely, can you imagine how different the world would be? The way they choose careers would be less about keeping my parents at peace, and more about the question, can I accept doing this kind of work forever? The way they love would be less about having someone next to me, and more about, if I had to live endlessly with this pattern of interaction, could I stand it? The way they use social media would be less about killing time, and more about, if my whole life were made up of hours drifting away like this in unconscious scrolling, would I accept it? This is a level of self-awareness far too high for a culture that needs you busy, distracted, and predictable. Someone who believes they have their whole life ahead of them, many other chances, will easily sell their energy, their time, their presence, to anything that knows how to promise a future. Someone who lives in the spirit of eternal recurrence knows this. Every day they live superficially is a day they accept the sentence, relive that superficiality forever, in their own mind. They begin to value time as the one thing that cannot be undone. By now you may have noticed something. Nietzsche does not come to give you a few cool ideas. He comes to strip away all your hiding places. The things you've been leaning on are dragged one by one into the light. Now that you've seen those cracks, what do you intend to do with them? Because after all, Nietzsche does not promise heaven, nor does he threaten hell. He simply places in front of you two very silent roads. Either go back to your old way of living, or accept the cost of being awake, higher, lonelier, but more real. On one side is the safety of the herd, on the other, the risk of taking the wheel yourself. No one can choose for you. Nietzsche's forbidden philosophy is not something to quote just to look edgy. It is like a blade. You either use it to cut away the layers of falseness in your life, or you put it back in its sheath and carry on as if you never touched it. But once you have listened this far, you will always know. The choice has always been yours.